Welcome to the next grade debate. I'm Angela Llewellyn with Advantage Support Services, and today we have Mr. Jameed Billingsley and Mr. Jeff Christie. Jeff is the president and CEO of Advantage Support Services, and Jameed, we all know as the managing director for Surgical Services. And today's topic, we're going to talk about multidisciplinary teams. And we've seen a lot of publications, a lot of articles about this lately, but Advantage, we have really focused in on developing multidisciplinary teams or even enhancing them with already existing multidisciplinary teams, what we're calling MDTs, inside the facility.
So I'll start off because what we see inside of facilities is rarely do we have a facility that doesn't think they have a multidisciplinary team. The biggest issue is, what does the multidisciplinary team do? Do you only meet when your hair is on fire or something bad happens? And so if that's what you're doing, that really drives the tenor of that meeting. And so the meeting turns into the blame game, or almost like a crime scene investigation show where it's like, you did this wrong, and it's not productive, because what happens is, who wants to go to that meeting? And then the other problem we see is that they don't meet regularly. And again, when you meet regularly, it becomes more pleasant. Whereas if you only meet when the building is on fire, it's not going to be a pleasant experience for anybody involved. So we have Jeff Christie, who partners with physicians that we support in several of our facilities, so he can help us with the physician's perspective of the effectiveness of multidisciplinary teams.
Yes, thanks for the intro on that, Jameed. Yeah, I think the surgeon, especially when we're talking about MDT related around operative services, is kind of a critical role. I think everybody on this call and viewing would agree to that. The problem that I've seen is, by the time a surgeon gets involved, it's already on fire, whatever the topic is. And it's really hard to unwind a emotional situation and bring a good thought process to a resolution or creating solutions for buy-in. And that's a critical part of having this group set up prior to you get into those situations, because you create good communication channels. You create hopefully a very positive environment where accountability is not used as a negative tool, but as an honorary look at what we have achieved. And when looking at that, right, Jameed, I think when we kick it back to you, I think, we really come at it from surgical services. And he was not just talking about trying to keep the program running, but how do you do that? And one of the things that Jameed really can speak to is just some topics, is what we call KPIs. Everybody knows about them, but we kind of always select out just a few to kind of bring examples about how to help a group maintain its longevity. Because once a problem is solved, the team goes away, and you don't want to lose that team, because then you have to rebuild all the communication. Let's touch quickly on MTD and KPIs and how they would happen in a mature. Let's talk about a mature, what your goal is when your group has gotten through all the hot stuff. Jameed, and I know that you've been in a couple of those, and why don't you share what that looks like once you get to the mature level of how to keep moving forward and not disintegrate.
Thank you, Jeff. So 2 issues with key performance indicators is the human propensity to choose the easiest ones to achieve. So we either choose ones that are easy to achieve, or we have a bunch of them and they don't have any impact on the quality as perceived by the OR staff, the surgeons, or if it's a KPI for the OR, it has no impact on the SPD relationship. So the first part is prioritize the issues, right? And then you try to pick them off with things that drive performance from both sides. So it's really key to develop and choose real KPIs. when you talk about that meeting to prioritize, I'm going to take that cynical perspective that we often hear, and that Angie is the master at working with, is Angie, I don't have time to have an MDT meeting. We're so busy, our surgical schedule starts. How can I have this 3-hour long meeting that you're trying to get me to have? Because it has to be 3-hour meetings. Because when we met before Thanksgiving 2 years ago, it was a 3-hour meeting.
So I think, what you guys are talking about to get to the KPIs, Jeff, is assessing and as a rounding team. So we first have to identify all of the areas and not maybe wait till, the ceiling's falling, but be a little more proactive and determine who's on the team. Please include IP, risk management, some leaders and some technicians from sterile processing, some leaders and technicians from the operating room, because each one can speak to their expertise and brings value. What unfortunately we're used to seeing. So I think it's developing a culture as you are assessing as a team to initiate things. So how would you, and what is your experience in beginning that MDT approach?
Either of us can answer this. We'll just play tennis with it, Jameed. One of the things that I think we kind of look at as an organization from Advantage is to add value and make it very important to the team. You need some, executive leadership. They might be there for the kickoff meeting, but it just shows that the hospital cares about this group and the time. If you're taking 20, 30 people and stick them in a room and you're talking for 3 hours, then you're not really doing the meeting right. What you need to do is have an agenda and then kind of pick what those topics are that we were talking about before. What are those things? Pick the low-hanging fruit so you have success early in the process. So that we have a target group where you have leadership from the C-suite, and then you just bring in your heavy hitters from the areas that you want represented in that, the director or manager, or depending on the size of your facility or your group, we'll pick the different ranges. We always think by the time you're done at the mature level that you will have leaders there, but the real hard work is going to be done at the next ring of people that are going to be in there. And we talk about, the target group, and then we have the next ring of people. And, Jameed, why don't you just kind of give some of those ideas of what that second ring is so you can see that the hard work is not done in the meeting, because when we're talking about half hour and 45 minutes, this is not a working meeting. This is approval of what needs to transpire and where the hospital and that group is going to put its energies. It's not to say, well, I didn't push this buggy around the corner and I messed, that's not this meeting. That meeting is done outside of this meeting. Jameed, and I'll throw it back because I know you have some real life experiences, and I've seen them in the meetings, but they're not my problems. So,
you hit the nail right on the head, right? So you have a core group that's really going to be the director of surgical services, the OR manager, the director or manager of sterile processing, and the IP representative to surgical services. And really, when you're starting off, like Jeff said, you have a kickoff meeting with the C-suite from the OR, from the hospital. So then the next thing is you pick the right time. So when you say you don't have time, you don't have time for a 3-hour meeting. You don't have time once the day starts going. But if you can commit to doing it 30 minutes, you can do it on your education day, on your late start day, or even on a regular start day when everybody comes in at 6:15. Because when you have a truly effective multidisciplinary team, you're not trying to solve all the problems on the list of the surgical services problems. And then you go from there and you start building an agenda. We agree that this is the main problem. The solutions are not, when you talk about root cause analysis, we identify the problem and then we look at that one problem from every different perspective. And that's where that second core of people, right? So that's where you have the service line coordinators, the SPD supervisors, and what have you. Because, we all pretend like we know what happens at night in OR and SPD and EVS, but we don't know.
It is really critical. And I think now you have determined, to bring C-suite in, always invite them, and then kind of break it down as you start the process. And then as you begin, you identified it. Now you've begun with the next level of people that are really going to implement the changes outside of that meeting, then come back to that meeting. Like Jeff said, it's not a working meeting. It's actually, what is the product of our work? And so we can talk to each other and get what Jamid is saying, little bits and pieces of more of the story, and deliver our product of the thing we were supposed to deliver in that meeting. And then what happens is, from what I understand, you guys tell me if this is real or not, but what I understand is now we have begun the process of change, and we're going to start reporting it. So we're reporting it to what we call internal customers and external customers. And maybe you guys can expand on a little bit about that. But what excites me about MDT is the momentum that it creates within the department, So to create momentum, how can we do that? Because that's really MDT is a multidisciplinary team with all these decision makers and implementation boots on the ground doers, right? But to me, the worker bee or the manager or somebody in the department, how's that helping me? How do you create the momentum?
But I think, the MDT leadership group, right, has to acknowledge the group or the second ring or the third ring of ad hoc folks that actually made it happen. Mm-hmm. And I think they have to provide the reward, the pat on the back, the recognition. If you want buy-in from the people making it happen, you have to recognize when they do great things. And when they're not doing great things, you don't bring them on the red carpet and have a public humiliation event. And I've seen that done at different places, and I just scratch my head going, wow, well, you're never going to get buy-in from that person again. And that wasn't the direction that everybody was trying to go at that point in time. So we have to figure out when you do positive solutions and make sure that you keep those up. Eventually in the mature cycle of this thing, you won't have many dragons to slay, hopefully. But that is also the time for you to prep for events coming up. If you live in a community where you have a lot of doctor movement, it might be at some point in some time that you create an onboarding plan that brings in not just the surgical team, but the whole ad hoc groups, where you have to have, people from supply chain helping you with buying instrumentation. You might have to work with the valet group that parks cars. You never know. You have to know to ask the question and to keep it moving. So to me, that's the most critical part. Recognizing the people doing the work and giving them the tools to do the work.
That's right.
And the time.
And I would like to piggyback on what Jeff said and what Angie was referring to as one of the things that we recommend is a communication board just for the multidisciplinary team. Mm-hmm. So we're going to over communicate changes because, and I can tell you from my own experiences and licking my wounds, is one of the things that you can't do is make changes in a vacuum. Hey, the case cards are coming up at 7 p.m. And that might be the right idea, but man, you are going to cause World War II. There might be a reason that you haven't even considered that they don't want the case cards up. And in this case, it was a legitimate reason that the night shift was responsible for cleaning the floor of the center core. And they didn't start doing it till around 10 to 12. So they would usually finish about 1 or 2 or what have you. So there's where you start talking about that ad hoc members. What needed to happen was bring EVS in and help them understand how important it is to start the floor earlier. So one big change is they're going to start doing the floor at 7 or 8. Is that going to work? And they go, no, that's not going to work. So that's where the multidisciplinary team comes in, where you get information from everyone, but then you communicate that information. And also that helps communicate wins, right? So we determine what we're going to monitor. We're going to monitor what time EVS does the floor. So that's a KPI. Anything that you're monitoring, recording, what time EVS does the floor. We're also going to monitor what time SPD sends the case cards up. Then the final monitor is what time the OR nights finish setting up the first cases. Your solution might cause other problems if you don't work with the other groups that are going to be affected. So
that's right. So on an MDT and KPI, you're stating and communicating, hey, we have it, we've audited, assessed this as a rounding team. We've identified this issue. Now we're going to communicate. These are the steps of the changes, and you're communicating a timeline for an outcome, an estimated timeline for an outcome. Like, how do you state what the KPI is trying to reach? Not just the steps to get there, but what goal are we going to achieve, and how do we communicate that through a KPI? Let me give you an example. I was at a facility a long, long time ago, and they wanted staff productivity to increase. So they put an individual graph on the wall, visible to every person in the department, every vendor, anybody from the OR, everybody saw individually how great or how poor you were doing, And I thought, I don't know if that's the right, it's an MDT is exposure to your own department, but not individually. It is a coming together as a facility whole, team-wise, for your patient. How are you going to communicate that KPI without exposing me, leadership, or a department?
So that's a great point. And what an MDT will help you do, right? Whether you're talking to your other departments or you're bringing that MDT format down to your own department, right? So sometimes you need to have an MDT in your department, because if you're the manager, you're just talking to AMs. Well, we know AMs does the least amount of work. I can tell you, as a director or manager, they do a lot of stuff that prepares for other people to do a lot of work. But so when you put out a number that's just productivity, you're absconding the responsibility of all the other factors that go with that. We have poor productivity. We also have to hand wash our rigid containers because the cart wash has been broken for 3 weeks. And I like productivity, but I'm also realistic to say there are factors that contribute to productivity.
I agree with that. And that's why I think, and Jeff, do you think that's why it's so critical for the technician level and the people actually getting all this work done, important to join one of the levels of the MDT, so they can tell you the kind of things that if I'm a leader from the OR manager and I'm walking through and rounding with the MDT team, I'm not going to see that. I remember as an educator, productivity was an issue in another facility, but there was a technician who would pull all of the rigid containers, label them, pull the tray and set them up on this side, pull all the trays and set them up on this side. And I mean, she was moving and shaking, right? Getting all those instruments put together and in the container. The problem was she was moving so fast, she put them in the wrong containers. So now you're pulling trays and, it's not the instruments you wanted. So as an OR director, I would not see that. Mm-hmm. And so a level of technician, I think would be important to tell you the intricacies of what are you actually viewing in your audits and rounding assessments.
And to support that, Angie, which I totally agree with, when someone's rounding, I think the best part would to actually work with a staff member and not the manager or leader. You know, if you're going to be a leader and you want to know what's going on, and they have some level of trust in the process, the manager probably needs to be kind of taken out. Maybe not the first time, so that they can save face and create a better solution. But as the new managers or new rounding comes in, that manager area should kind of fade out of the picture, so that the ownership is taken by the people doing the work, not the overseers. So
I agree.
I was still chuckling to myself when you guys were talking about putting productivity up by individual.
Yeah.
It probably would be good to stick the average on the wall,
Yeah.
and then go
Right.
over with everybody where they help or not help.
Well, and I think sometimes, Jeff, people do that because they don't want to do that second part, right? I can post your thing, but I don't want to talk to the people who are not meeting it. And I think that's critical, because I can tell you from personal experience, when you start talking to the people who are not meeting, it doesn't even have to be a rude talk. But guess what? They start increasing their productivity. And going back to your rounding point, that's exactly what's going to happen during a survey. And so that kind of what you're saying to avoid is exactly what gets us in trouble in a survey, because our plan is we'll do all the talking, you guys just work, and then the ones who can't talk good, we're going to hide you. You go out on the dock or go to Center Core. You go to Center Core when they're in SPD. You go to SPD when they're in the OR. The problem is the surveyors are going to want to talk to the people that do it.
We want to thank you for your time, Jeff and Jamid, for jumping in on the great debate and delivering all this great information I know that we can use out there in the OR SPD world.
Thank you, Angie.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for all the hardworking technicians and professionals of all levels that are out there supporting us and making this industry better. Thank you for joining this talk and looking at this video, and we look forward to seeing you soon live.